Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is FrancisP, and I'm a personal development and recovery coach based outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And today I want to do a video talking about something that has been extremely beneficial to me in my life, my growth, my recovery, my change process, and that's unconditional self-acceptance. And it's actually part of three different types of unconditional acceptance, beginning with unconditional other acceptance, unconditional life acceptance, and unconditional self-acceptance. But today I really wanted to focus on the unconditional self-acceptance part of it. So let's get started. All right, so first we're going to talk about what is unconditional self-acceptance and also how is it different from self-esteem. And I'll start by talking about self-esteem, which self-esteem is defined as, our view of ourself, and esteem is derived from estimate, our estimation of ourself against usually other people in different areas. So we can have self-esteem in our level of achievement, our starting from at school with different grades, suppose it's in gym class, your physical ability compared to other kids, development, different things like that. But it's an estimation of where you're at and compared to other people. And when you are above average or doing well in something, it feels good. You develop good, high self-esteem. If you're below average in different areas or struggling at different areas, people develop oftentimes low self-esteem, which can be detrimental towards your goals, your growth, your development, and these types of things. And I'd actually mentioned self-esteem in another video when we were talking about self-compassion. And Dr. Kristen Neff had said that, self-compassion picks up where self-esteem leaves off. So this is kind of another tool in our toolbox of how to view ourselves differently from self-esteem, which is, anybody growing up in the 90s, 2000s, there's a big self-esteem movement, which helped a lot of people develop high self-esteem, but left a lot of people behind. So let's talk about what is unconditional self-acceptance. And I pulled this definition from a Virginia government website, but I was actually looking through a book that I'm going to be referencing throughout this video for Albert Ellis's, the guy who came up with this concept, his definition. And in the book, it's actually a phenomenal book, The Practice of Rational Motive Behavioral Therapy. They don't have like a one sentence definition. So I actually had to search other places to find just like a clear definition. And what I found was one good one was self-acceptance is defined as an individual's acceptance of all of their attributes, positive or negative. When we're self-accepting, we embrace every part of ourselves, not just the positive things. Self-acceptance is unconditional. You can recognize weaknesses, but still fully accept yourself. To be self-accepting is to feel satisfied with who you are, despite flaws and regardless of past choices. So in talking about the difference between this and self-esteem, when we're talking about being self-accepting, even our weaknesses, our flaws, it's to be able to look at them and not to turn away from these things instead of to something to be too painful to be able to actually objectively look at in ourselves. We can actually begin to interact with it. And, part of this book, they're talking about things like ego disturbances. And a lot of times it's wounds to our ego, something that is painful that causes us to not be able to deal with it, to turn away from it, to either be in denial or to have it be defeating us because now we've developed this belief in our head that we can't do a particular thing. And now it's actually interrupting, our growth and our progress towards our goals. So if we can learn to look at ourselves objectively and learn to accept these things and to develop an estimation where we're at, but it's not about comparing ourselves to other people in terms of that's where we're going to get our satisfaction from. It's to have an accurate picture of ourselves to learn where we can grow at. And to me, when I find an area of weakness, that's a place that I can have a lot of growth ability. If you have an area that you've really been working on, you're eventually going to plateau at levels of growth. But if you have something that's a real weakness of yours and you start working on it, the growth, there's these big jumps, and that can be really fun of itself. And that's part of, to me, what's appealing about this, to be able to have this objective look at yourself and remove the emotional component, to not have to get upset, to not have to get bummed out, to just be able to accept. And it's easier said than done. And we're going to go through some of these different 10 points of self acceptance. And it's a concept that can seem very simple on its face, but really in practice, putting it into your life and integrating it into your heart, that takes work and it's extremely beneficial. So let's talk about also what it's not. So self acceptance is not resignation and it's not self esteem. And I'm going to quote the book here in terms of resignation. It says, unconditional self acceptance promotes constructive action, not resignation. If we can accept ourselves as fallible human beings with all that this means, paradoxically, we have a much better chance at minimizing our errors and psychological problems than if we condemn ourselves for having them in the first place. And essentially, what they're saying is, if we can recognize that we're going to make mistakes, that we're going to have areas that are challenging for us, that we can learn to actually make adjustments, minimize our errors, and not condemn ourselves for having the issue or the problem in the first place. And that's also like a secondary upset. You're being upset that you're upset or upset that you're struggling with something, and now it's this compounding effect in this downward spiral. So it kind of removes that entire component from the equation. And I want to talk about, these 10 different points to unconditional self-acceptance. And that's why, it's a, 3 words, unconditional self-acceptance. Like I said, it can seem very simple. How do I accept myself unconditionally? All the different parts of myself, because maybe parts of yourself that you're not a fan of, but how can we give them a hug, learn to integrate them, learn to accept them and work on them, and become a fuller, more developed person after having worked through this. And some of these different things are philosophies kind of and viewpoints that by incorporating them into your worldview, into your belief system, can help you alter the way that you view yourself and view yourself comparatively, to other people, and stop relying so much on self-esteem. And starts with, number 1, the first point, human beings cannot legitimately be given a single global rating. So, even to say I'm a good person, a bad person, a smart person, a dumb person is probably a better word, I can't say these things about myself. Sometimes I can be highly intellectual and do really ditzy things. Sometimes I do wonderful altruistic things, and sometimes I do things that I'm oblivious of, that may be hurtful to other people. Everybody makes mistakes. Nobody bats 1,000, as I also say. So I don't rate myself in these ways and apply these labels to myself, which we'll get to that as well. So I don't give myself that single global rating. So it's hard to have that sense of self-esteem when there's so many different variables. And they say in the book, it would take some kind of, immeasurable computer to try and figure out all this different data to try and rate you. And even then, every day you'd be adding more data to the equation. It's really too complex for us to reduce it to some, I'm a good person, I'm a bad person. 2, human beings are essentially fallible. We make mistakes. Computers make mistakes. I don't know if you've ever had, piece of electronics like phones, computers, they mess up. So if computers make mistakes, how do I expect myself as a human being to be perfect all the time? You can't. I make a reasonable, good effort every day. I try and apply myself. I try and be mindful. I try and make good decisions. I try and be kind, but I'm also fallible. Like I said, I'm going to accidentally put my foot in my mouth occasionally and say something. Sorry, there's kids yelling outside. They're having a good time. That might hurt somebody's feelings without meaning to. I'm good for that. And it's something that it just happens in life. And every time I, beat myself up over a little bit, but I work on these things. 3, all humans are equal in their humanity, but unequal in their different aspects. we're all human beings. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're a president, if you're a doctor, if you're a janitor, if you're a caretaker, you're a disabled person, who, it's friends and family to other people, like everyone is equal in their humanity. We all are worthwhile as human beings, and we don't measure ourselves based on these self-esteem materialistic things and these labels. That we're unequal in our different aspects, and that these different skills that we have, but we're equal in our humanity. No one is better than anyone else. And when you're operating from that premise, then you can stop judging yourself based on other people, better or worse, whether you're being judgmental of other people, like, oh, look at that person, or you're comparing yourself to other people and going, oh, look at that person. Here's where I think I should be. That's where they're at, and why am I not in the same position as them? 4, the rational use of the concept of human worth. And that kind of builds on that, same premise of, we can't really put a price or a value on the worth of human beings, and that we're inherently worthwhile just by existing, by being, by having the capacity to build, to be there for other people, to be part of the community, that we inherently have worth. It is not tied to these different labels. It's not tied to the amount of money you make. It's not tied to on your physical ability. It's not tied on your mental ability. None of this. That's not where your human worth is coming from. So a rational concept of human worth, and how we can apply it to ourselves and to other people. Number 5, unconditional self-acceptance avoids errors of overgeneralization. Same thing we were talking about, this the single global rating, and I was talking about being a good person, a bad person, a smart person, it's really hard to overgeneralize yourself. And when you make these, sweeping blank statements, and this ties also into, we were talking about self-talk. So if I say, oh, I'm stupid, or oh, I'm good for nothing, or oh, I'm lousy, you probably use the words that Ellis was saying, lousy is an old word to me. But by saying these negative things to ourselves, we're really painting ourselves with a broad brush and in a really negative light. And if anything, it's going to be more detrimental and hinder us towards our progress, because if I'm in a mental place where I'm saying these negative things about myself, odds are it's actually going to divert me, away from, my goals and working towards them. So by having the unconditional, self-acceptance, to say, I'm worthwhile as a person. Yes, I do have different aspects of other people. I have different skills than other people, but, nobody else has more of a right to be in any room than I do, to exist, to be part of a conversation, to just be part of humanity. No one else has a right to be here more than you do. No one else is, we're all equal in this. And to keep that in mind, I've known people who basically apologize for existing. They habitually say, I'm sorry, and they feel like they're intruding just by being alive. And I've told my, friends and stuff that have dealt with this, like, you're part of the fabric of humanity. You have just a right to be here as everybody else. You have a right to be in the conversation as everybody else. Don't feel that you're some second-class citizen to every other human being on the planet and put yourself in this back seat. It's really not fair to yourself, and it's just not helpful towards how we're trying to grow, I think, as a society. Because honestly, I think that these concepts of unconditional other acceptance, life acceptance, self-acceptance, I know how much they benefited me. I know how much they can benefit other people. And the more that, that's why I'm making these videos, we can get this stuff out there, the more that people can start to feel better about themselves, which is my ultimate goal. So we're avoiding these errors of overgeneralization, making these sweeping blanket statements about ourselves. Also number 6, unconditional self-acceptance is based on flexible preferential philosophy. And what that means is like, okay, let's say, I'm not super physically strong, I've been working out now, pretty hard for like almost a year and a half, I guess it's been. And I'm not where I'd like to be, but I'm way further than where I started from. So it's like, well, I'd prefer to be able to bench this amount, but here's where I'm at. Here's where I started at. Like, I can measure the growth. Look at me. I'm making moves, and But instead of getting all bummed out about it, or getting too obsessed about the goal, like I need to be able to do this, and Albert Ellis talks a lot about, he calls it masturbation. I should, be able to do these things. When you're putting that kind of pressure on yourself, it's not healthy. So if I go in there and I know I started here and now I'm here a couple months later, like, oh wow, look, I'm seeing progress. That's the name of the game. That's what we're doing here. So when I use my self-talk, I would say if something is a deficit of mine or an area that I find challenging, I would prefer, if I was better at it. I would prefer, for life acceptance. If it was a nice sunny day, I'd prefer. If it's a beautiful sunny day, that's not always the case, but I prefer it, instead of putting these musts on yourself and on life, these conditions. Hence, unconditional. 7. Unconditional self-acceptance promotes constructive action, not resignation. And I quoted, a little part of that, where it's not saying that, okay, well, I guess this is my lot in this area of my life. I'm just not good at that, Look at somebody like David Goggins. I'm not sure if, familiar with him, but this guy who literally is like, you know what? I'm not a very strong reader. When I read books, it's really difficult for me to understand the information. So he would literally copy down the book he was reading and make another copy for himself, writing it out, so that way he can help improve his memory, incorporating different senses, your physical, your if you're reading out loud to yourself, your auditory, your visual senses, like, how can I get better at these different things? So by not just saying, okay, I guess, I suck at that, like, how can I promote constructive action? What are some steps that I can take? What's a change plan that I can make, how to get better at this? Like, literally all the different things I'm talking about, it's how to put all these different pieces together. So when you discover a challenge, when you discover an obstacle, you can put steps and a plan in place in order to get better at it, to develop yourself in it. Number 8. Unconditional self-acceptance is a habit that can be acquired, but never perfectly, nor for all time. And I literally, after I was making this, like the presentation part of that, I was thinking about this a lot, because I've been working on this unconditional self-acceptance now, let's see, since 2015, 2016, so like 7 years. And I've gotten really far in a lot of areas, but occasionally, with different things that come up, I'll start judging myself based on other people, comparing myself to other people. I could take views on my YouTube channel. Let's use a new one, and say, okay, like, I'm not getting the amount of views I would prefer, right? But how do we begin to, think about it and feel our way through it without letting it deter us? And that's why all I can do is keep making the videos, right? And I can just say, it's okay, I don't need to judge myself. I can make adjustments. I can think of things I can do differently. But I know that them feelings of self-doubt, these different things are going to come up, and that for the rest of my life in different areas, if I'm comparing myself to other people, it's easy to do with different areas like income. It was easy to do with, like I said, the strength and different things before. What should a person your age be able to bench? Am I at that? It's easy for me to start looking into these things, especially as a person who growing up was above average in different areas. I'd be just naturally good at things. I thought that was the way that life went until it didn't. And then suddenly when you start finding areas that you're struggling in, you're like, oh my God, I'm not good at this thing. I guess it's just not for me. And that's not the way. Really, you got to work on things, develop your process. If you ever heard of like Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell, I think, wrote it, the 1,000 or 10,000 hours, that you really have to work on this skill, and just like the unconditional self-acceptance, a habit that can be acquired, I'm going to continue working on it, but never perfectly nor for all time. Leads into number 9. Internalizing the philosophy of unconditional self-acceptance is difficult and involves hard work. It really is. Like, reading about this, watching this video, hearing me speak about it, you can buy the books. There's a great book, The Myth of Self-Esteem, but integrating it and internalizing it and bringing it into your heart is really the challenge. And that's why I make this like kind of in-depth video. I'm not even sure how many minutes we're at here, like 19 minutes. Because if I just talk about it in like 30 seconds or 2.5 minutes and give you this real quick blip, oh, here's unconditional self-acceptance, is about not turning away from the difficult parts of yourself, challenging parts of yourself, where your weaknesses, being able to just look at yourself objectively and accept yourself, give yourself a hug, and boom, end of video. You're like, okay, cool. I don't really think people are going to internalizing it. Like, I think you really need to understand how we're developing this, because it's a philosophy. I think there's a thin line between philosophy and psychology. And these are really philosophies about life, about yourself. The Albert Ellis he's deriving from people like Epicurus, a philosopher that said it's not the things that happen to you that disturb you, it's the way that you view them. So really, he's deriving it from philosophy. And to me, this is a philosophy of how we view ourselves, and bringing it into your heart is really the long-term goal, by reading more about it, learning more about it. And then number 10, unconditional self-acceptance requires force and energy. Like, this stuff takes work. Saying that I'm going to accept myself, I'm not going to base my view of myself on self-esteem, I'm not going to use materialistic ideas, especially like Western, civilization ideas of, materialistic ideas of self and where I should be in order to have my self-esteem, to estimate myself. Taking this and bringing it in your heart, like I said, it's a process that does take time, it does take energy, but the more that you do it and the more that you work on it, and this is just the first part, and this was the last one to come to me, like the unconditional other acceptance, being able to take other people as they are and not want other people to conform to how I think they should be or behave. That was like one of the easier ones for me. The unconditional life acceptance. I can't control the weather. I can't control the stuff going on around the world, geopolitical events, completely out of my control. Like, I can accept that. Unconditional life acceptance. I can't do hard drugs. Yeah, not a thing. I just had to accept that. The unconditional self-acceptance took me the most work, because I think parts of self-esteem are so ingrained in us, and I think even school is made to be competitive, and I was very competitive in school, especially intellectually, and it's not a great place to be in mentally. And I think once I was able to let go of that and just learn to accept that, yeah, like I said, there's areas I'm brilliant in and there's areas that I am so incredibly ditzy in. It is unbelievable. And to be able to like accept these things about myself and to give myself that hug and to just work on these things, it's just a lot healthier of a place to be in. But, I hope this was beneficial for you. And, in conclusion, unconditional self-acceptance can help us take an objective, rational look at ourselves without all of the negative emotional baggage that comes with ego and self-esteem. It can also help improve our self-talk and help us towards our goals. And like, that's just something I kind of wrote. I guess that could be almost a definition. But that is the crux of this part of it, and I'm going to make videos on unconditional life acceptance, the unconditional other acceptance, but for unconditional self-acceptance, I think this just really touched the surface of it. I would still recommend check out the book, The Myth of Self-Esteem. This book is actually like made for, therapists and counselors, but it's a practice of rational motive behavioral therapy by Albert Ellis and Wendy Dryden. But this stuff has been extremely beneficial to me, and I know that it can help a lot of other people out there. And lastly, thank you. All right, have a great day.